the best for us at this point. But I think as the VA system gets more intelligent with regard to, it's very intelligent, I mean, say it's not, more advanced with using that technology and capability, and veterans and active duty know about it, that is going to allow us to come together much easier.
May I add something to that too? Because I also have been using the term active duty, but we like for people to know and recognize National Guard and
Yes.
Reserve, Coast Guard. These are populations that they also really need help, and their families are not always as connected. Both, whether it's the Guard or the Reserve, a lot of times they might be very spread out. They're not necessarily in a closer knit community. And so those populations, they really need that outreach too. They need to know about the programs. Very often the service member might hear about something, but it doesn't get translated to the spouse. And so there is a whole spouse, children who are not being
Right.
able to make use of resources that they could be.
And that's why I think like a VA, and if the DOD had something similar, the calendar and the events that anyone can go onto and look at, not only do our military families, whether still wearing the uniform or not, need these services, but people in our community need to. And so that's what we do. We try to bring the community, like local communities in. And thankfully this last summer, we had a sponsor from Washington, D.C., Hun Floor Gallery, who paid for the travel and staying in D.C. for our Library of Congress event for over 70 people from all across the U.S. and one from Canada. But that's rare to find. And so how can we create this awareness of value and meaningful engagement that can happen in a medical environment, in a therapy session, in therapeutic arts? You know, that's really the challenge that I think we come to, is how we get them to the events once they know that the events are happening.
And if I could add to that too, our yoga therapists are becoming much more adept at providing telehealth or teleyoga. So being able to work with people even if they can't leave their homes as well.
So what are some of the other challenges that you've experienced in getting people connected to the healing arts services that they need?
Well, I think it was Anne-Marie who mentioned earlier, there's really a need for research, which would support, you know, getting some of the funding. But even with the research and with this type of healing arts, a randomized controlled trial might not always be the best type of research to have. So looking at other ways where we can do qualitative research, case studies, and so forth. So we are really careful to ensure that our students are really adept at research and start them conducting research very early. So with case studies, and I think that's really important. And it helps us to be able to be a voice in an integrative team that can speak both the healing art language as well as the scientific language.
And this question is for all of you, but I'll start with you, Layla. What are some ways that the traditional healthcare system can better connect with the healing arts and get services to the patients that they serve?
Great question. So we've thought of that. We have been inviting care providers from different military installations or veteran care groups to come to the farm, have a demonstration of equine assisted therapy, because it's very hard to sit in a room like this or on a phone and describe to somebody what it would be like to be interacting with a 1,500-pound animal, or in the case of our percheron, a 2,000-pound animal, and to be out and hearing the sounds and the smells and being out there, right? So we've invited these care providers to come to the farm, have a demonstration, right? Come to us and see what it feels like, and in the hope that they will realize the benefit and refer clients to us, right? So we know, I know through some of our volunteers, because at our horse rescue and our Let's program, we have quite a few active duty Navy and Army volunteers. So young men and women who come out to the farm and they volunteer taking care of the horses. And even some of them have asked us about the therapy program, and they say, you know, we have friends who really need some help, but we don't know where to go, and we don't want to go on base because, again, we don't want it to be recorded somewhere that we're getting help. So yes, I think this bringing the providers to us, having memorandums of understanding, which we've started to do with the different vet centers, so that there can be referrals, because we have the capability to help people, whereas in some of these places, there's a waiting line. You know, you've got someone with suicidal ideation, they're being told they have to wait 3 months to see somebody. That's not okay, right? So getting the word out, inviting people to come and see your program, experience it.
Anne-Marie, I know you had a connection with some of the healthcare staff at Walter Reed as part of the Healing Arts exhibit that they did. Can you tell us a little more about how that connection was developed and the mutual benefits of having that sort of relationship?
Thank you. And I have to say, my experience with the arts from a professional standpoint started with the National Endowment of the Arts, where I worked with the DoD, the VA, and the NEA on creating creative forces. That was a strategic plan that I had written and implemented. So I really started on the creative arts side, and because of that, I had an opportunity to meet practitioners and phenomenal researchers and doctors that were doing things all over the U.S. And those centers of excellence, whether it's the Boston VA or Tampa, Florida, or, you know, across the nation, to be able to see what they need for data and what their findings are, and then to go, oh, 1 + 1 equals, there's information from community programs that are providing therapeutic arts that can help the medical creative arts therapists do a better job and know how to integrate people in, so that it's collaborative, but it also augments, you know, the day-to-day inability to get a medical appointment. So with Walter Reed, they have an annual art show. So we do all the back work for that. We set it up, we take it down, we do the artist narratives, and we work with Red Cross when we do that as well. And so now we have a large nonprofit that tries to understand it, but their mission is a little bit different than ours. And so we're able to give them the exposure, the veterans and family members, the visibility of the art if they want to share that. And if not, then they're able to participate and at whatever they feel comfortable with. And at the same time, members of Uniting Us and the therapeutic arts side, if they're really struggling, we now have connections, whether it's Walter Reed, Fort Belvoir, or other DC VA hospitals and medical care, where we can say, hey, give them a call. You have TRICARE, you have VA health coverage. Give them a call. Talk to this office. And so now what we can do is we can start to influence not only the awareness of what we do, but help understanding that if art's not it, it's okay. Maybe equine is, or yoga. And so that it's just the interchange in knowledge and information that we can pass one another that brings us together.
And Marilyn, what do you see as some effective strategies to get traditional healthcare providers to see the benefit of the healing arts?
Well, we are seeing growing numbers of yoga therapists actually in hospitals, in the VA, at Walter Reed, those areas as well as community-based areas. And so we're finding that yoga therapists are showing up and being with people where they are. Some of it is community-based. And so we need to continue to expand the number of yoga therapists that we have working directly with healthcare providers, physicians, but also mental health providers. We have quite a few that work with mental health providers. We have a growing number of healthcare providers who are turning to yoga for their own training, so that they can now incorporate yoga therapy in with their practices.
So now I'm going to come to what I think are some of the most critical questions for moving forward. So what needs to change? Are we investing enough in research? And what is the call to action that we all need to embrace? So I'll start with you, Layla.
So I think we could be doing more. We definitely could be doing more. Again, as I said before, we need more outreach. I think we need more funding. We were discussing funding. Sometimes when you're running a nonprofit, you barely have time at the end of the day to start looking for that grant and writing it, you know. But without funding, nonprofits can't provide services, right? So, I do think that the research is important. I know that the VA has identified equine-assisted therapy as an adaptive sports for mental health, and has provided, this year they've put out quite a bit of money for that. And I think it's important to keep research happening and doing some kind of tracking metrics to show what it's helping, what conditions it's helping. I know we have paperwork for our veterans who come in. I'm not the clinician, so I don't know which forms we're using, but you know, basically on the PTSD scales before, midway, and after, because we do have a program. They're not just coming in for one time. They're coming in for a 12-week program. So I think a call to action, again, is more outreach, more funding, and definitely collecting some metrics to show what and how your program is helping the veteran population.
And to you, Anne-Marie, what needs to change? Are we investing enough in research? And what is our call to action?
Okay, so I'm going to start out by saying I cannot say if we're investing enough in research. But my question is, are we leveraging information from programs that you can do comparative analysis on, as well as qualitative, which is, I think, sometimes it's hard to demonstrate value through qualitative research, but leverage the data that's out there and the programs that are doing it and that people are voluntarily participating to and regularly showing up for. And if we do that, if we can connect the researchers with organizations that are in the healing arts arena and in creative arts therapy, what is the return on investment? So is creative arts therapy, where you pay $80,000 a year for a therapist in a medical environment that helps 40 patients a year, what can you buy on the therapeutic arts side? We need both, by the way. I'm not arguing that. But it needs to be looked at. So what is the return on investment? How can a 12-week program become a long-term, maybe it's a volunteer or an ambassador for your program that helps you now becomes part of your system beyond their therapy? And I think that there's data that exists, or that there's organizations that can put that data together, but finding a research team that is interested in what your tiny nonprofit, I say tiny because, I mean, that's what we are, but how do we match up with that? So my call to action on that is, from a research standpoint, you know, how do we get involved on the nonprofit side? Because what we're doing, we have a model, we have a framework, and we have data, we have participants that are more than happy to talk about their experience. So how do we connect the two?
It seems like one of the challenges is that traditional healthcare providers in medicine and the healing arts tend to be somewhat stovepiped, and there's not a lot of cross-communication or collaboration. And there really needs to be, particularly when you want to look at things like outcomes. And I think we have a shared goal of improving outcomes for individuals in the areas of mental health, in the area of addiction recovery. And if we can demonstrate what is most effective, that benefits everyone. And so I don't have a great answer for it, but it does seem that greater collaboration could result in better outcomes for many more people. And so I'll turn to you, Marilyn. What needs to change? Are we investing enough in research, and what is our call to action?
What needs to change from my perspective with regard to yoga is a better understanding of what yoga is here in the West. I think often we don't understand that it is a therapeutic practice versus just physical getting fit and whatever that is related to. But that when we're looking at alleviating suffering, it's not just a one-time thing that you do when you need to do it. It literally is a lifestyle change. It's how we move through life. So education, I think, is one thing that we're continuing to work on. The next, research. Again, I think that there is a lot of research. There's not enough research. It's not a little bit different in that we are very, very fact-based. And how do you capture the outcomes that you can't put a number to? But that is a quality of life change. So I think that is an area that we should look at as well. We're starting to be involved in a lot more research. So again, it is gathering the research that is available, maybe more mega-analyses, but to use some of the research that's available and to continue the research. I think about the NIH and some of the work that they're doing there, so being part of that. And a call to action would be to look for a way that we can make the healing arts accessible to the people who need it the most. And part of that is education, making sure that they know what is available to them, but also presenting it in a way that they can relate to. So accessibility, I think, is a call to action. And of course, policy. Policy, that's my focus. So it's always, how do we affect policy? Particularly, so in the veteran and military community, they have access, through the VA and through the Department of Defense. But what about people who don't have access to those avenues of support and being able to reach them as well?
Okay, so I will sum things up by having everyone give their call to action again. Layla, what would your call to action be?
My call to action would be definitely get the word out, whether it's education, outreach, however you want to put it, of different programs that are available to people in these populations, and maybe more accessibility for funding as well.
And
I'll
Anne-Marie?
build on you. I agree with you absolutely, because we can't have more than one, right? Call to action. Okay, good. So I'm going to add to yours. So 2 plus this 1. I really think that connecting researchers with nonprofits that are viable but maybe have been overlooked by researchers in the past because we're new or we're doing something different would help to connect not only the healing arts but also connect from medical to the community and the bridge between. And so that would be my call to action.
Marilyn?
Ditto and ditto. And to add to that too, and I think we've all spoken to it today, is, and based on where we are right now, is collaboration. If we just work together, build on each other's experiences and strengths and interests, that I think that we're probably able to maybe, hit each one of the other calls to action that we've mentioned today. So collaboration.
Yeah, and my call to action would be a call for advocacy. Everyone can be an advocate, and I think one of the things that can increase collaboration is for individuals within the different realms to advocate for that collaboration, particularly in the area of research, which is an interest of mine. And I believe we have some time for questions, so I'd like to open it up to the audience.
Since I have a built-in mic, I'm going to go ahead and steal it first, because I'm dying to ask a question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
coming out of the pandemic, I think that events and symposiums like these are so critically important, where different nonprofits are able to get together, hear each other's messages, and collaborate. I heard a lot about collaboration, and of course, you know, my heart is singing hearing about the research needs and being able to provide that evidence to support and document the good work that you're doing. My question is this, and the focal point for a lot of care in the veterans community, we know it's Department of Veterans Affairs. In the non-veteran community, it could be civic centers or your local physician. My question is, what have you seen as effective strategies to get the nonprofits that are doing the work and providing that assistance offline to collaborate and work more closely with the government agencies so that the two can work together? For instance, healing arts cannot solve the problem alone. The physicians cannot solve the problem alone, but together you have a really dynamic formula where you're able to combine the formal therapies from the physician's office and the less formal therapies that have been designed now by the nonprofit. So how do we combine those?
Lou, that is a really good question.
Thank you.
And it's part of kind of what we've talked about as far as collaborating, but government agencies sometimes are limited on their ability to collaborate with nonprofits because it might show a preference. And so how do we have a vetting where discussions can happen, where government employees, whether they're DOD, VA, or whatever, can sit at a table and learn about what's going on without the fear of getting in trouble or showing some type of perceived preference where then they get in trouble because they're endorsing somebody. That to me is what stops a lot of conversations and ability to really move forward and make things happen and stand side by side.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I heard, and I believe it was in the second panel, was the importance of evidence, especially as it relates to outcomes. And so if nonprofits can find a way to build into their program some outcomes research, when that's presented to organizations like NIH or organizations that fund research, it's an opportunity to produce additional evidence. And in that way, it's not a matter of favoritism, it's a matter of this is an evidence-based decision on behalf of the government to offer these services because there is data to support this as an effective intervention.
And if I could add to that, in some instances, evidence-informed practices would help as well.
I'm Renata. Actually, listening to you both is great to hear that you need more research because one of the things we actually do is Bravo Victor does research focusing. It's a holistic approach. One of our major research programs is about non-medical interventions to improve outcomes. It is specifically art therapy, sports. We're not in the animal sphere yet. And what we've been finding actually is we've been doing a very scientific, rigorous methodology, you know, the outcomes you wanted to look at and so on. We've been doing that, and especially this program we've increased it significantly over COVID. And the reason was, you mentioned accessibility. And COVID was the test for accessibility. And not only that, we needed to work with veterans living with disabilities. For example, how do blind veterans use art therapy throughout COVID? And then we found that, you know, remote delivery boxes, it's called Mystery Art Box Project. Boxes being delivered into these people's homes. They are blind. They needed help to go through their art therapy, and it became family therapy sessions. And the results are outstanding. We're developing the research program. So if you need a bunch of researchers with specialism in that area, we're happy to help. And we actually started this because an institution has been for over 100 years delivering art therapy, but they needed to know the outcomes to check if their services needed to be adjusted, stopped, improved, or expanded. And it was kind of how we started. So, we're more than happy to help over here in the US. Thank you. And well done on your work.
This question
Young
over
lady
there.
to the right.
Hi. I just wanted to first say it's so amazing to hear about the different modalities of work that you all are doing, and I have so much admiration and respect. I'm a mind-body nutritionist and health and wellness coach, so anything that has to do with expression of emotions, getting more in touch with one's self, I'm all about that. So thank you. I had a question about the evolution of the healing process within your different avenues of work. So for example, Marilyn, I heard you talking about getting people more comfortable with, or maybe not comfortable, but changing the relationship with pain. And maybe that's where a person starts out at. But then once we start to move beyond that, once a person is feeling more comfortable with themselves, feeling more able to cope with and process discomfort, what do some of those next steps look like for a person in any of the work that you all do in art therapy and equine I know a little bit about the equine therapy because I'm here with Lila, also an equine specialist. But yeah, just in any of the modalities that you do, what do some of those next steps in the evolution of the healing process look like? Thank you.
Well, from my perspective, first of all, once a person is able to see themselves in a different way, then they start to move through life differently. Their relationships change, maybe their jobs change, what they focus on in their life changes. And it sounds really simple. I really, really understand that it isn't, but it does start with the person. And then their reactions are, rather than reacting, then what action do you take based on you? And so it just moves out to everything that's around them.
And I agree with that, and I think really what it comes down to is scalable programming.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to meet the veteran or the family member, caregiver, where they're at, and sometimes that means that they just want to be kind of behind the camera on a Zoom call, talking, hearing people talk about art. Or they went to an event that was equine therapy and there were some artists there and they kind of got really interested in that. And when they're ready for it, that there are programs out there for them to participate in. And that comes back to collaboration. And so what we see is this development of, enhanced personal meaning and narratives so that they can communicate better and they feel more comfortable because they now have skills and capabilities versus going to a doctor where they say, well, you can't do this, when you bumped your head, you do this. Now it becomes what they can do. And so to me, that scalability and collaboration is what helps people kind of walk up those steps and get to achieve what their goals are.
I would add one thing to that as well, and that would be we have started offering group therapy now. So we might have an individual who's gone through the 12 sessions, and they're at a better place, but they still are not, ready to step away from the therapy. Mm-hmm. So they enter a group, and it's just floors me to find that a particular person entered this group with not a lot of confidence, but okay, was willing to do it, but then was soothing the other veterans. Hey, I did that too. It was hard for me to come here today. I was scared, and having that group work we think is really important. So yes, there's the very beginning where you've just got to get a person okay in their skin, right, and able to control their anxiety or their racing heart and getting someplace and doing something. And then for us, the next step is getting them out in a group where they can share their experience and work with each other, collaborate with each other to say, you're not alone. I did that too,
And it normalizes things.
It helps,
Right?
it really helps.
Yeah.
So we've come to the end of our time, and I just want to thank all of our incredible speakers, and I'd like to thank the audience for their time and attention, and I think I've heard some potentials for collaborations. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're good. Thank you, Dr. Christie.
Okay, better? Hello, I'm Justin.
Okay. I haven't gotten them yet. You want, I'm sorry.
And I'm good?
Fine.
Everybody gets a Cadillac.
We're good.
I'm going to count you down. Okay, we're going to go in 3, 2, 1.
Well, welcome back, and we just heard from our Supporting Healing Through the Healing Arts panel, which I hope you took away from that as much as we did here in the audience. They're still talking about it. What an exciting panel, and thanks for sticking with us. We're on our last panel of the day, and by all means, you will be rewarded for waiting. Our Innovation in Mental Health Treatments panel is going to be moderated by Brigadier General Maureen Wagle. She's the Pennsylvania Deputy Adjutant General for Veterans Affairs and oversees programs of reintegration, outreach, veterans initiatives for nearly 80,000 veterans and their dependents in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and including 6 veterans' homes. She's a graduate of the Army War College with a master's in strategic studies. She went to Harvard Kennedy School, and she is a Lean Six Sigma Belt project manager and executive leader coach. Okay. Our panelists include Bob Kerry, who's a friend and someone that I've worked with very closely here in Washington, D.C. for a number of years. If you're in the veteran advocacy community, you know the name Shoe Bob. Shoe Bob is a passionate veterans advocate, government relations specialist, and a retired captain from the United States Navy. He has a master's in strategic studies from the Naval War College. Next, we have Dr. Carl Hammer. Dr. Hammer is a clinical professor in education studies and director of the Office of Evaluation and Research for the University of Alabama College of Education. He researches military-connected populations through his 30-year career and specializes in military to civilian transition. And finally, we have Justin Phillips. Justin is a 2016 White House Champion of Charge advocate and prevention and treatment, and founder and executive director of Overdose Lifeline. Overdose Lifeline helps reduce the stigma of substance abuse and disorder, and helps prevent deaths resulting from opioid abuse. General?
Thank you, Lou. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank the Foundation and Mary Lou for having us today to have this much-needed discussion. As a state worker for the state of Pennsylvania, this is a critical topic for me. I wish I had the answers. I'm excited to talk to this wonderful panel so I can learn more and take it back to my state. This is a problem that all of my counterparts in their states have, is how do we connect veterans and folks in need to the services? There are many services in each community, but so many people don't know where to find the help they need. And there are obviously many gaps to care and programs. So I would like to start this discussion off, and I'll start with you, Bob. If you can identify in your areas of expertise some of the major gaps and programs and services in the federal, state, and the local level.
I think one of the, and thank you very much for you and for the foundation for having this and for the opportunity to speak today. One of the things I think is really needs to be addressed is the access to care. And I am a disabled veteran. I utilize the VA healthcare services. And I recently suffered a pretty significant traumatic brain injury about 1.5 years ago. And as I was coming out of that rehabilitation, I was told that I was going to be waiting probably 3 to 4 months to be able to start behavioral health care. And they also were unwilling to provide me the access to the community care because they were worried that they would not then be able to coordinate my care. Well, it really doesn't matter if you're coordinating my care or not if I don't have care in the first place. And so that I think is a huge issue. The rules for access to community care are clear and established, and there seems to be a real hesitancy on the part of the VA to allow that to happen for fear that people will see care other than the VA and say, I like it over here better. We have found over and over again that veterans that are receiving mental health care have a lower suicide rate, and if you're not providing that care in a timely fashion, you are going to have a higher suicide rate. And so I'd say that's the number one thing that needs to be addressed. There's a hearing today, actually right now, at the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee about the access to care in general and the issue of whether or not the VA is slow rolling veteran access to VA care. But I know that for mental health care, it is a huge issue, and it's probably one of the worst in terms of access to care for veterans right now that is out there.
And Carl, would you say there's enough resources and enough care for the veterans in the communities if they can access the care?
Absolutely not, actually. We need more programs on the ground. One of our colleagues this morning talked about the community connection. And I think the VA medical centers are great hospitals on the whole, but they're not in the community. You've got to think about what's there when they go home. And that's if they go at all. So how do you get them into care? And so how do you connect people in distress to care, whether they're veterans or otherwise? And that access varies radically across the country.
And Justin, you work in the nonprofit space for opioid use and substance use disorder. Are you finding it hard to connect to veterans and finding folks that are in need, working with the state and local governments to let them know that you're there, to let them know that the resources are available? And what do you find your challenges are?
Sure, thank you. And again, as everyone has shared, thank you to the foundation and Mary Lowe. And I agree with what has already been said, that access to care is a gap for everyone. We don't treat diseases, mental wellness and substance use disorder, which are chronic diseases of the brain, affects to the brain, the organ, like other chronic diseases. So we don't respect anyone who works in this profession in that way. We don't have enough individuals, no matter who we need to serve, filling this field. The people who take decades to get treatment, and by that time, they're so far down the road. So I agree with what's been shared. And as a nonprofit, people serving veterans and the entire community are often siloed. We don't do a good job partnering together. We fight for the resources rather than collaborating, and I know the previous panel touched a great deal on collaboration. People don't know where to go. This challenge around mental wellness and substance use disorder is so highly stigmatized that we are afraid to ask for help. And if we're judged and punished, if you will, which I know has been shared, for asking for help, it contributes.
And Bob, as you mentioned, access to care is a huge issue. What is the demographic of veterans that are most at risk that we need to focus our attention and reach out to help them get the access to care?
Well, the VA just came out with their annual VA veteran suicide report. And while it showed over the last couple of years there's been some small decreases in the overall veteran suicide rate, when you look at the 2001 to 2020 data, it's still really significant. The number of veterans has gone down by about 25%, from about 27 million to about 19 million, but the number of veteran suicides has gone up. It has still gone up, and the rate has gone up 39% per 100,000. And for the 18 to 34-year-old veteran, it's gone up almost 100%, 97%. And for the and one of the big issues is that in 2016 report for the 2014 data, the VA did report on combat exposure and veteran suicide risk. And they looked at the Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, New Dawn veterans and that were in VHA services and their suicide rates. And their suicide rates were 5 to 6 times greater than the overall veteran suicide rate, especially for the younger male veteran. And so I think that, and for some reason, the VA has not continued that type of analysis, nor has DOD in their annual